To understand everything about atomic bombs, how they were created, and how they were used in World War II, read my book O Atomo Como Arma, which is for sale on Amazon and also at the WeClap store. If you want this copy autographed by me for you, just send an email to saladeguerra@gmail.com with your postal code so I can calculate the shipping cost. Today I want to talk to you about something I just finished reading, which was this book right here. Alcanto Suga, Duas Pátrias. I found this book at the Immigration Museum shop in São Paulo, the Japanese Immigration Museum in Liberdade. I visited the museum in 2024, and I found this book there in their little shop at the end of the visit. And I liked the cover, even though I had no idea who Alcanto Suga was, but I could already guess, right? Of course, the boy is here wearing a Japanese military-style uniform. I'm not going to say it's actually an army uniform, no. But look at what's here. There's the dome, right? The Hiroshima dome. The dome that was left there after the atomic bombing. And here, look, in the book summary, it says that Alcanto was in Hiroshima in August of 45. I said, wait a minute, this guy's Brazilian. And he was in Hiroshima in 1945. Yes, then I opened it, and what a surprise, it's signed by the author. It's signed by Alcanto Suga himself. In a search I did on the internet, I found out that Alcanto passed away around 2020. I believe that by 2020, he had already passed away. So when I bought the book, Alcanto had already passed away. And I searched on the internet. There are very few books, very few copies for sale, okay? So if you find it, I recommend that you get your copy of this book here. But what book is this, man? Why is it important? Why did I find it interesting? Check this out. First of all, it's a book by a Brazilian guy, the son of immigrants, who falls into the category that became known as Kihakunisei. Kihakunisei means children of Japanese people who returned to Japan. They're re-immigrants, okay? And Alcanto, he went to Japan at the worst possible time to do that because he ended up getting stuck there during the Pacific War, World War II. And so before it's really a military history book, before it's a war book, this book here is a family history book, okay? Because it actually focuses on the life not only of Alcanto, but also of his father, right? And his father plays a very important role in his life and in the decision to send him to Japan. Look, it's a book that goes back to the history of Japanese immigration in Brazil. And I personally had never read a book about Japanese immigration in Brazil. Everything I learned about Japanese immigration, I learned kind of indirectly. I read other things, I watch documentaries, I talk to people, but I had never actually read a book specifically about Japanese immigration, And it's a story that I found really interesting. I found it really rich, and the way it presented all this felt very, very new to me. There were many things I didn't know. The book, it starts by showing you exactly this personal side of those first immigrants. Alcanto's father, Joichi Suga, actually stays in Japan after his own father. Takaki Suga comes to Brazil in 1913 along with his wife and youngest son. So these guys, you see that they come about 5 years after the first immigrant ship, and they go to work on the coffee plantations in the countryside of São Paulo. Most Japanese immigrants come for this purpose, right? And the book retells the whole journey of these immigrants who had to get off the ship in Santos, go up the mountain, go to the immigrant hostel in São Paulo, and then be redirected to the farms. And how some of these immigrants, disappointed with the reality of farm life, end up returning to São Paulo and trying their luck there. Right? Trying to invest in some way, working there to be able to succeed in life. And then in 1914, Alcanto's father, Joichi Suga, comes to Brazil because his father sends for him. And this young man, Joichi, he works in Japan as a carpenter. Actually, he makes boats. He builds wooden boats. Coming to Brazil then, after a period working in the fields, he goes to São Paulo and starts working in construction, especially carrying out those Japanese carpentry techniques, with very well-made joints between pieces of wood. So he suddenly becomes a successful contractor in Sao Paulo. He goes to Uberlandia in Minas Gerais to expand his business there and builds a lot of important things in Uberlandia. And then he ends up having a work accident there. He falls from a height of 10 meters, man, 10 meters. If I'm not mistaken, this happened in 1918. He goes back to Sao Paulo after spending about 6 months hospitalized in Uberlandia. And there in Sao Paulo, he tries to restart his life somehow. He looks and he finds a property, a big property, with a very attractive price and very good payment terms for him. He then decides that he will invest in a varnished furniture factory in Sao Paulo, which he names Casa Mikado. Mikado is a term that refers to the Japanese Empire, the royal house, the Japanese Imperial house, right? And his success in this profession comes very quickly because he brings to his business all the rigor of Japanese carpentry and the personal discipline he brings to his work. And the guy gets married and he's going to have 2 daughters. His third child, finally, right, he had been waiting for a long time, a boy named Alcanto, the protagonist of the book. And it's curious how they came up with this name, Alcanto. Alcanto was a mix of a mistake by the notary, right, at the registry office, and also, I believe, from the way the father and mother pronounced it, because it was supposed to be a tribute to the family that employed his mother, right, when his mother first came to Brazil, which was the Alcantara family, right? So it ended up being Alcanto. Curious, I found the name's origin very interesting. These children, when they start to grow up there, their father already has a more stable situation, right? Already a very successful businessman in the city. And he sends his children to study at the old Deutsche Schule, right? The German school of Sao Paulo, which later during World War II was renamed to Colegio Visconde Porto Seguro, which is the name this school still uses today, right? At this school, many children of German immigrants who settled in Sao Paulo studied. And, in fact, many students from the Deutsche Schule re-immigrated to Germany, and many of them became the famous Brazilian soldiers of Hitler, which is a book written by the historian Denison de Oliveira, whom we will interview here on the channel in a few days as well. Alcanto, he is sent by his father to Japan, along with his older sister Nasia. They are sent in 1936 with the goal of studying in Japan to improve his knowledge of the Japanese language and also of Japanese customs, and also to make Alcanto a doctor, for him to study medicine at the University of Tokyo, which is his father's great dream. And there in Japan, they are welcomed by their grandparents after a 2-month journey at sea on a ship called Buenos Aires Maru. And I always catch myself like this when I remember this passage from this book, how in 1936 it was considered completely useless. It was normal to put an 11-year-old child and a 9-year-old child alone on a ship that would travel halfway around the planet, all the way to Japan, spending 2 months at sea. How things were different, right? And so in the book, you have access to the memories of Alcanto's sister, saying that one day, during a storm that hit the ship in the middle of the ocean, the ship rocked so much that Alcanto was thrown against the ship's railing, and the boy almost fell into the ocean and got lost. Incredible. It's incredible how this kind of thing could happen. It was taken into consideration by the parents, and even so, it was still possible. No one criticized at the time the fact that the family allowed the children to travel alone, right? But then the book gets into what, in my opinion, is its best part, because it's about the adaptation of these young people, right? Alcanto and Anesia. Life in Japan, life at school, life in Japanese society, which was already going on even before the war, in a situation where there was little room to spare. So there was always a very big restriction on the family's consumption on daily necessities. And the situation only gets tighter when the war arrives, and it keeps getting worse, right? And how the Japanese government kept the tragic reality of the Pacific Front hidden from the population. So we can continue with the story. Even in 1944, when Alcanto turns 18 and he receives the draft letter for military service in the Imperial Japanese Army, and then he joins a group that, according to the book, included dozens of Brazilians who served in World War II in the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy, many of whom died in combat. Their stories were completely lost, and some others returned to Brazil. Among these cases, the book mentions a congressman named João Susumu Hirata, whom I didn't know about, a congressman of Japanese origin who went to Japan in 1940 to study and ended up spending the whole war there. And when he returned to Brazil, he was elected as a congressman. He was one of the first parliamentary representatives of the Japanese community in Brazil. I would like to point out that in the section on the Second World War, there are some dates that are not correct. It needed a little more careful research to pinpoint some events, right? Of course, considering the whole work here, this is just an observation, but maybe for the second edition, it would be worth having a Second World War historian review the dates presented here, because some of them are incorrect. But I won't even tell you the whole saga that Alcântara goes through to be able to return to Brazil. But I'll tell you this. When he arrives here in Brazil, after having served in the Imperial Japanese Army, Alcântara is arrested as a deserter by the Brazilian Army because he turned 18 and didn't report for service. He didn't report because he was in Japan, and then he goes on to serve in the 1st Battalion of Light Tanks that used American Stuart tanks in Campinas. It's a fantastic story of a young man of Japanese-Brazilian origin who served in 2 armies, right? 2 homelands. I'm not going to give you any spoilers here at the end of the book. It's a book I really liked because it's a very interesting family story, and that's my recommendation. If you can get a copy, read Alcântara Suga, Duas Pátrias, because it's an extremely interesting read. So, did you already know that there were Brazilians? Did you know there was a group of Brazilians of Japanese descent who went to Japan to study, ended up staying there, fought in World War II in the Japanese Imperial Armed Forces? Many died, but others returned to Brazil? Tell us in the comments below. And to complement this story, there's nothing better than reading my book. The book, O Atomo como Arma, will tell you how the atomic bombing of Hiroshima happened. If you want your copy autographed, just send me an email with your zip code so I can calculate the shipping. If you like this video, then share it with your friends, give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to Sala de Guerra so you don't miss anything else. I'll stop here. Thank you again for watching, and best wishes from Sala de Guerra.